My husband's voice was the last thing I ever wanted to hear, but the most terrifying sound was the click of a tiny phone, the phone that proved my entire life, my entire reality, was a lie. You know how it is, right? When you realize the ground beneath you was never truly ground at all, just a cleverly painted trapdoor. Most people, faced with that profound chasm of betrayal, they choose messy drama. They choose the screaming matches, the flung plates, the public humiliation. Me, I chose annihilation. I didn't want his money, I wanted his life. I wanted the complete erasure of his future, the shattering of the flawless image he had built, brick by meticulous brick. We didn't just have a life, we had the life. 20 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children who were our pride, and a sprawling, custom-built house overlooking the coast of California. It wasn't just a home, it was the physical, tangible manifestation of Mark's success, and my own quiet, relentless, utterly unquestioning devotion. I was Sarah, the wife who managed the calendar, the social appearances, and the relentlessly organized pantry. He was Mark, the successful real estate executive, a creature of such profound, suffocating habit that his predictability was, ironically, the foundation of my security. Mark didn't tolerate disorder. He demanded a kind of pristine, airless perfection, and I provided it. I learned to iron his shirts, not just smoothly, but with the collars precisely starched, a subtle tribute to his crippling obsession. I learned to measure my voice, my needs, and even my occasional moments of sadness, so as not to disrupt the delicate, fragile balance of his world. Our routine was a metronome, set to a slow, steady, deeply boring rhythm. Breakfast was always at 7:15 a.m., 2 eggs over medium, never soft, never hard. Dinner was 7 p.m. sharp. Every Christmas, the same playlist. Every birthday, the same expensive yet impersonal piece of jewelry. His life was a flawless work of art, and I realize now it was a forgery. He was so consumed with perfecting the external world, the shine on his shoes, the precise angle of his ties, the exact placement of his golf clubs, that he neglected the rot spreading beneath the surface of his own soul. I was simply too busy polishing the mirror to look through it. The tension in our home wasn't smoke, it was the slow, insidious burn of lies. It began subtly, about 2 years before I finally found the thing. The kind of small changes that a tired, comfortable wife dismisses as simply getting older or stress. First, the cologne. He came home late one Tuesday, smelling faintly of a new, expensive, musky scent. It wasn't the classic light sandalwood he'd worn for 2 decades. I mentioned it casually, reaching for his coat. "Oh, that's just a client gift, darling," he said, not meeting my eyes. "A new brand. Smells like cheap whiskey to me, but I didn't want to be rude." He kissed my forehead, a perfect, practiced gesture that was meant to close the conversation, and immediately disappeared into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. I remember standing there, the scent of the new cologne mixing strangely with the faint, cold smell of rain on his coat. It lingered on the silk scarf I'd been wearing, a tiny chemical reminder of a question I shouldn't ask. Then, his phone. Once, he'd left it on the kitchen counter, notifications chiming freely. Now it was always face down, silenced, and always, always within arm's reach, even when we were watching a movie. If he left the room for even a minute, to grab a drink, to use the restroom, it went with him. I remember once, I reached to pick it up to answer a call. It was my sister, Lisa. Mark flew across the kitchen, snatching it away from me with a violence that made me gasp. "I've told you not to touch my things, Sarah," he hissed, his face pale with a mix of fury and genuine panic. He looked like a cornered animal. 10 minutes later, he apologized, bringing me a weak cup of tea and a hollow explanation about sensitive corporate documents. I accepted the tea, but the cold dread remained, settling into my bones like damp air. The physical distance grew, too. He stopped eating my homemade lasagna, the one dish he used to devour. Stomach issues, Sarah. Too rich for me now. He claimed to have developed severe, sudden allergies to my light, floral perfume, forcing me to switch to unscented lotions, making me feel like a ghost in my own skin. He started going to the gym at 5 a.m., a man who had never voluntarily woken before 7. I praised him. "Oh, darling, you look amazing. It's wonderful you're prioritizing your health." I celebrated my own impending doom, mistaking the sound of his escaping footsteps for the sound of renewed dedication. I was a fool, a happy, trusting fool who wore blinders made of unconditional love. I became an insomniac. I'd lie next to him, listening to the regulated shush, shush of his breathing. He was asleep, or at least pretending to be. I was wide awake, staring into the oppressive blackness of our bedroom ceiling, trying to connect the disparate pieces of the puzzle. The phone, the scent, the sudden chill in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking, the cold conviction that something enormous was terribly wrong was starting to solidify into a terrifying, solid shape in my gut. But Mark had conditioned me. To question him was to risk destabilizing the entire system, and destabilization, in Mark's world, was a catastrophe. So I stayed silent. I kept my doubts locked away in the attic of my mind, hoping they would starve and disappear. It finally snapped during a particularly mundane Saturday afternoon in late September. The air was crisp, the sky a deceptive, innocent blue. We were preparing for a dinner party with a client couple Mark desperately needed to impress. He needed an obscure financial reference from an old journal he kept in his home office, the one room I rarely touched. Mark always kept that room locked, citing, with a wave of his hand, "Client confidentiality, Sarah." You know the drill, but this time, he was rushed. He needed the reference immediately. He threw me the heavy iron key without thinking, already halfway out the front door to check on the liquor delivery. The office was exactly as expected, immaculate. Tax files stacked precisely, books organized by color. The air was dry, smelling of leather and old paper, the scent of money and cold, unquestioned control. I found the financial journal on the bottom shelf, but as I reached for it, my eyes snagged on something. A tiny, almost imperceptible scuff mark on the dark oak floor beneath the heavy, antique dictionary stand that sat beside his desk. It was a fresh mark, a minuscule, insulting imperfection in Mark's world of obsessive order. The premonition hit me then, a cold, sickening wave that washed away all my logical defenses. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a cold, metallic certainty that the source of the rot was beneath that stand. The moment was suspended, silent, terrifying. I reached out and pushed the enormous dictionary stand aside. It slid easily, confirming my fear. Beneath it was a small, crudely carved compartment in the floorboard, hidden by a thin layer of dust. And there it was. Not a document, not a bill. A tiny, thin, prepaid burner phone, wrapped tightly in a rubber band. It felt foreign and cold in my hands. My hands, the hands that had cooked his meals, raised his children, and signed his legal documents, were trembling as I pressed the power button. The wallpaper on the screen was a picture of him, with another woman. She was younger, vibrant, and smiling up at him, and she was wearing my diamond pendant, a piece he'd told me was too fragile to wear often. That was the moment, the final devastating click. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. The silence that filled the office was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The emotion bypassed my throat and settled as a stone in my gut, hardening my resolve. I sat there for what felt like hours, scrolling through years of messages. It wasn't a fling, it was a second life. A second home, a second promise, a promise he had kept for 7 long, meticulous years. He even had a second secret vacation fund for her. He had built 2 separate lives, but he had done it using the foundation of mine. I closed the phone. I didn't smash it. It was evidence now. I replaced the dictionary stand, walked out of the office, and locked the door behind me. I had 20 minutes before Mark returned. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I returned to my life, carrying the immense weight of his secret. But now, the secret was my weapon. I closed the phone and locked the office door. The sound of the lock clicking shut was the sound of a new resolution forming, a sound far louder than any scream. I didn't smash the phone. It was evidence now. I replaced the dictionary stand, making sure the scuff mark was perfectly hidden, and returned to the kitchen. Mark was due back any minute. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands, which had trembled uncontrollably just moments before, were now strangely steady. There was no room for hysterics. Hysteria would give him time to hide his assets and hire a preemptive lawyer. I needed surgical precision. I needed to become a ghost who had access to every bank account, every document, and every vulnerable point in his fortress of a life. For the next 90 days, I became the most perfect wife Mark could have ever dreamed of. I smiled wider. I was more agreeable. I even initiated intimacy, performing the routine with a chilling detachment, tasting the metallic bile of the lie at the back of my throat. Every kiss was a lie I returned to him. Every meal I prepared was a distraction from the financial files I was meticulously studying in the dead of night. I didn't sleep. I calculated. My revenge was not about emotion. It was about logistics, law, and leverage. I learned the precise language of financial disclosure. I read every line of our joint accounts. I memorized the dates of his offshore transfers to the secret account he was funding for his other future, the one he was building for the woman who wore my pendant. The deepest, most profound realization came when I examined the deed to our coastal house. Years ago, Mark, in a moment of utter professional arrogance and perhaps a careless desire to avoid an obscure tax regulation, had given me full, unilateral power of attorney on the property. He had forgotten that detail. He thought of it as a piece of paper, a formality. He never once thought I would be the one to sign his world away. That document became my detonator. My first essential move was hiring a lawyer. I didn't go for the flashy, expensive billboard lawyers. I found a quiet, brilliant woman named Clara. Her office was in a cramped, unremarkable building downtown, smelling of stale coffee and relentless work ethic. She specialized in financial fraud and complex asset dissolution. I walked into Clara's office on a Thursday morning at 8:05 a.m. I didn't cry. I sat down and placed two things on her desk: the burner phone and a thick tabbed binder containing 7 years of documented lies. I spoke in clinical terms, my voice flat, presenting the evidence without a single wasted word or a hint of self-pity. I require an inventory of every single asset, private and joint, I told her. I require an immediate freeze on all joint liquid capital and a strategy to liquidate the primary residence without his knowledge until the final moment. Clara didn't flinch. She was a brick wall, efficient and devoid of personal emotion. You are seeking financial annihilation, not merely divorce, Mrs. Harrison, she stated, confirming my intent. Infidelity is easy to prove. Fraud and premeditated asset hiding are devastating. We will proceed with the latter. The legal meetings consumed my life. Twice a week, I would excuse myself from Mark's perfect routine, inventing elaborate stories about joining a charity book club or taking an advanced cooking class. The lies flowed easily now. They were necessary. They were strategic. Clara focused on 3 main vulnerabilities: the power of attorney, the offshore accounts, which were legally questionable due to their filing, status, and the pattern of financial abuse that could be established by documenting the money spent on the other woman, money diverted directly from our joint savings. We weren't just gathering evidence of cheating, we were documenting 7 years of calculated financial assault. One particularly grueling session lasted 5 hours. We sat in that stale office, poring over spreadsheets. I learned to read the cold language of money: transfer dates, wire instructions, account names. The other woman wasn't just a mistress, she was a financial accomplice. Mark had established a trust in her name, funding it monthly with money that should have been our children's college savings. I felt no rage then, only a profound, cold fury. He wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying the children I had raised alone while he was busy building his second life. "We have enough for the initial preemptive strike," Clara announced one afternoon, pushing a stack of legal papers toward me. "The key is the house. If we can execute the sale under the power of attorney before the divorce is officially filed and served, he will be financially paralyzed. He will be legally homeless before he knows he is legally single." The house was the main target, our beautiful, custom-built coastal home. It was his symbol, his fortress. I quietly contacted an exclusive real estate broker known for discreet, fast sales. I didn't want the house shown. The view alone, the agent assured me, was enough for the specialized market. I met the agent, a slick, over-tanned man named David, in a neutral parking lot. I handed him the power of attorney document, watching his eyes widen as he realized the legal leverage I held. The sale was structured as an off-market deal, confidential and contingent on one specific date, the moment Clara gave the final signal. I was selling his castle, right from under his feet. The irony was overwhelming. Mark would leave for work, whistling, still believing he owned the four walls that contained all his secrets. And I, his devoted wife, would be on the phone with the buyer's attorney, finalizing the exact minute his life would become financially extinct. The final financial maneuver was the toughest. Using the evidence of his offshore fraud and the power of attorney, Clara secured a temporary restraining order on the most lucrative of our joint retirement accounts. I took the hit, the massive early withdrawal penalty, a small price for ultimate psychological control. I liquidated the fund, paying the fines, and transferred the remainder to a secure account I opened under a trust name. A ghost account, legally untouchable, ready for the final transfer. I was dismantling his kingdom brick by brick. By the end of the third month, his entire financial reality was a ticking time bomb, and I held the detonator, waiting patiently for the perfect Tuesday evening. The day came exactly 98 days after I found the burner phone. I chose a Tuesday, a mundane, unremarkable Tuesday because Mark's life was built on mundanity. He left for work at 7:45 a.m., kissing me quickly on the cheek, muttering something about a difficult closing he needed to handle. His parting words were the most profound lie of his life. "I'll be home early, darling. We should discuss that European trip you wanted." He was still whistling when he walked out the door. The irony was suffocating. He believed he was walking out to conquer the world, unaware that I was already finalizing the sale of his world from the dining room table. That morning was a flurry of controlled, frantic activity. Clara's legal team, the real estate agent David, and a notary arrived separately, discreetly. The house, his castle, felt strangely cold, no longer belonging to us. The closing was swift and silent. I signed the documents, the ink drying on the paper, sealing Mark's fate. The significant sum, the proceeds from the sale of the house he thought was his security, was immediately wired into the ghost trust account I had set up, an account he didn't know existed under a name he would never trace. I remember watching David, the real estate agent, leave. He looked at me with a strange mix of pity and awe. "You're a force, Sarah," he whispered before closing the door. I didn't respond. I was a force only because Mark's weakness had demanded it. After the professionals left, the silence in the house was immense, a profound, echoing silence. I spent the next 5 hours meticulously cleaning, not because the house needed it, Mark's standards ensured that, but because I needed a physical task to anchor me to reality. I polished his favorite leather armchair, the one he sat in every night while reading stock reports. I ran my hand over the antique desk where the burner phone had been hidden. I touched every object, not with affection, but with finality, as if performing a last quiet ritual before an execution. I meticulously prepared the battlefield. On the immaculate dining room table, the one where we'd celebrated our silver anniversary, I laid out 2 thick stacks of papers. The first stack was the evidence, printouts of the explicit texts, the transfers to the mistress's trust, the fraudulent documents Mark had prepared. The second stack was the consequence, the final deed of sale, the temporary restraining order for his accounts, and the formal divorce petition, marked with the exact time and date it had been filed. When the clock hit 7 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of his BMW pulling into the driveway. My body, which had been buzzing with nervous energy all day, became perfectly still, a statue carved in ice. The door opened. "I'm home, darling," he called out, his voice cheerful, oblivious. He walked into the dining room, loosening his tie, a faint trace of that new, musky cologne trailing behind him. He looked happy. The genuine happiness of a man who believed he had successfully managed a major financial deal and successfully maintained a huge lie. He stopped when he saw me sitting alone at the table, framed by the two precise stacks of paper. "What's all this, honey?" he asked, his smile slowly fading, replaced by a slight furrow of confusion. He hated clutter. I looked him dead in the eye. For the first time in 20 years, I spoke without measuring my voice, without suppressing my truth. My voice was low, level, and utterly without warmth. "It's the paperwork, Mark. The final paperwork." He laughed, a nervous, sharp sound. "Sarah, you know I don't deal with the household bills. What is this, taxes?" He tried to reach for the nearest stack, the one containing the evidence. I stopped him with a single, calm word. "Don't." I pushed the first stack toward him. "The betrayal." "That," I said, my voice hardening, "is the full 7-year history of your second life. The second home. The second retirement fund. The woman who wears my necklace." Mark's face went pale. The blood drained so completely from his cheeks that the contrast with his meticulously groomed hair was horrifying. He saw the photos, the texts, the legal names. His composure shattered instantly. "Sarah, please. Let me explain. This is a mistake, a terrible mistake." He was begging, his voice cracking, but he was begging to save his image, not our marriage. "There is no explanation for 7 years of calculated deception, Mark." I cut him off, my voice a whip of cold air. "But there is a consequence." I slid the second stack across the table. "The consequence. That," I whispered, leaning forward, ensuring he heard every word, "is the deed of sale for this house. It closed this morning. The proceeds are in a secure account that your lawyers cannot touch. That is the temporary restraining order that has frozen every single account bearing your name, joint or private. And that is the final divorce petition, filed 10 minutes ago." His eyes widened in a look of complete, abject terror. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the papers, at the figures. He was looking at his life, evaporated. You can't do this. It's illegal. I'll call my lawyer. I own this house," he screamed, finally losing control, his voice rising to a frantic, pathetic pitch. "You owned this house," I corrected him calmly. "You gave me the legal authority to sell it under the power of attorney. You forgot about your own meticulous paperwork, Mark. You see, your flaw became my opportunity." I pointed to the restraining order. "You can call your lawyer, but you will find they can't access their retainer. The bank accounts are empty, Mark. They are absolutely, irrevocably empty. You have a few $1,000s in your pocket, and that is the entirety of your liquid wealth." The shouting and panic woke the children. They were teenagers now, but they stood on the stairs, watching their father crumble, watching their successful, perfect father reduced to a whimpering, ruined man. That was the only part that truly hurt. Their innocence was lost forever. Mark didn't stop. He went for his desk, scrambling for his phone, the burner phone. He realized it was missing. I simply reached into my pocket and held it up. "I have it all, Mark. Every text, every promise, every single lie, and it is all legally documented." I walked over to the front door, opened it, and stood by the threshold, not needing to say a word. The message was clear. His double life had cost him everything. Mark didn't leave immediately. The shock had rendered him immobile. He staggered back from the table, his manicured hands sweeping the carefully arranged papers onto the floor. He didn't look at me or the children who were still frozen on the stairs. He was staring at the space where his financial security used to be. "You are insane," he finally choked out, the word barely a whisper. "You are completely, clinically insane. This will never hold up in court. You can't just sell a marital home without my signature." "I did," I replied simply, stepping away from the door and moving toward the kitchen, my movements deliberate and slow. "The closing attorney was very thorough, Mark. You signed the power of attorney 15 years ago believing it was a brilliant tax loophole. It wasn't. It was the key to your cage." He followed me, his initial panic turning into a desperate, grasping rage. "The accounts! You can't touch the retirement accounts. I will ruin you. I'll tell the children you're mad. I'll file an immediate injunction." "You'll try," I said, pouring myself a glass of water, "but you'll find that your lawyers, and indeed, every lawyer you call, will require a retainer, a very large retainer, and your cards will decline, Mark. Every single one of them. The freezing order on your liquid assets went through 2 hours ago." He pulled out his wallet, the expensive leather wallet I'd bought him for his last birthday. He pulled out a platinum card and threw it onto the marble countertop. "Try it," he spat. I picked up the house phone and dialed the number for the bank's fraud department, a number Clara had insisted I memorize. I asked the automated system for a balance check on the associated account. The cold mechanical voice came through the speaker. "Available balance, $0.00." The sound of that mechanical voice stating his financial extinction was more devastating than any courtroom drama. Mark didn't scream this time. He made a horrible, strangled sound deep in his throat. He realized, finally, that this wasn't a tantrum. This was a strategy executed with merciless perfection. I watched him, not with satisfaction, but with a strange, detached curiosity, as if observing a stranger's slow demise. I saw the successful, arrogant executive melt away, leaving behind a terrified, utterly dependent boy. The dependence he had always placed on me, to manage his home, his schedule, his children, had extended to his finances, and he had forgotten how to function without my invisible hand. The children, our son, Alex, and daughter Chloe, finally descended the stairs. They looked from their father, ruined and sweating, to me, standing calmly by the counter. "Mom, what's going on?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. That was the only moment I allowed my calm facade to crack. I looked at my children, their confusion, their pain, and knew I was damaging them to save them. "Your father," I said, my voice heavy with a truth I never wanted them to hear, "has made some choices that affect our home. Very serious choices. But everything will be secure. Your college funds, your future, none of that is compromised. Your father simply needs to leave." Mark saw the opportunity. He lunged toward them. "She's lying. She's destroying us. Your mother is having a breakdown. She sold your home, children. She sold our house to pay for her delusion." I didn't argue. I simply picked up my cell phone and dialed 911. "I need an officer dispatched to my residence immediately. My husband is on the property, creating a hostile environment and refusing to leave. I have a valid, filed restraining order, and I fear for my safety and the safety of my children." The police arrived in minutes. Seeing the uniformed officers, Mark's last thread of control snapped. He tried to explain, pulling crumpled papers from the floor, his voice frantic and incoherent. The officers only needed to see the restraining order, the signed divorce petition, and my calm demeanor juxtaposed against his wild panic. They escorted him out. He stopped at the door, turning back one last time. "You will regret this, Sarah. You will regret destroying your life." "I destroyed your lie, Mark," I corrected him. "You destroyed your life." They led him to the patrol car. He had his suit, his shoes, and the few $100s he'd had in cash. He was, for all intents and purposes, financially destitute and legally separated from his home, his assets, and his family. The mistress's apartment was the only place he had left to go. A mistress who was about to discover her wealthy benefactor had become an angry pauper. The silence that returned after the siren faded was absolute. I looked at Alex and Chloe. The hardest part of the annihilation was telling them the truth, not about the cheating, which they would figure out, but about the cost. Over the next few weeks, the legal maneuvers began. Mark hired an expensive, aggressive lawyer on credit, promising future payment. That lawyer, true to form, tried to strike back immediately, filing motions to annul the house sale and challenge the freezing of the accounts. But Mark was facing a fortress. Clara had foreseen every move. The house sale was legally sound, conducted under a valid power of attorney. The accounts were frozen due to the documented pattern of elder financial abuse, a legal classification that carried criminal weight and ensured no judge would quickly unfreeze his access. We didn't have to win the divorce yet. We just had to keep him financially incapacitated. Mark was forced to rely on credit cards and loans from friends. He learned, with brutal clarity, how quickly people abandon you when your success, your facade, is stripped away. His mistress left him 2 weeks later. She realized her dream of a European future had been transferred to a woman named Sarah's ghost account. I began selling off his remaining, personal, non-marital assets, his golf clubs, his watch collection, his expensive wine cellar. Every sale was perfectly legal and was done to liquidate any remaining item that brought him comfort or status. It was psychological warfare. Every time he went to grab his favorite driver, it was gone. Every time he thought of pouring a rare vintage, the cellar was empty. My life was now simple. I had the children, the security, and a quiet, profound sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing for 20 years. I had not won a divorce. I had won my life back by destroying his. The immediate aftermath was quiet, almost anticlimactic. The war was over, and I was left standing in the rubble of what had once been my beautiful, treacherous home. Mark was gone. The silence he left behind was immense, not the cold, controlled silence of his routine, but a warm, genuine space that finally belonged to me. Our children, Alex and Chloe, struggled. I didn't hide the truth of his actions, but I protected them from the ugly, legal specifics. I didn't ask them to choose sides. They simply witnessed the disintegration of their father's character. They saw his immediate, desperate focus on money rather than on them. That, more than any divorce paperwork, taught them the true measure of their father. Mark's aggressive lawyer soon withdrew. When he realized Mark was genuinely financially dry and that the legal argument was a swamp of his own making, the firm cut their losses. Mark became an embarrassment, a disgraced executive whose entire downfall was being quietly whispered about in every high-end real estate office in the city. He moved into a small, rented apartment, one he could barely afford, and took a mid-level job far beneath his qualifications. His life, the life he had so meticulously built to impress, had collapsed. I remember receiving a thick, final letter from his last remaining attorney, a public defender, no less. It was a plea for mercy, not a legal threat. Mark was requesting access to a single item from the house, the large framed portrait of the two of us, taken on our 10th wedding anniversary. He claimed it was the only thing that proved his life wasn't a complete waste. I read the letter and paused. It wasn't pity I felt, but a deep, final understanding of his pathetic need for validation. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I drove to a quiet landfill site near the coast. I found the portrait, which I had carefully placed in the garage on the day of the sale, and I threw it into the nearest dumpster. I drove away without looking back. There was no need for a relic of a life that was never real. My quiet victory wasn't the money, which was now securely funding the children's education and my own fresh start. It was the profound personal transformation. I started planting a garden, something Mark had always forbidden because it interfered with the lawn symmetry. I bought a loud old record player and filled the house with the kind of blues music Mark had always called common. I learned to be messy, to be loud, to be truly, imperfectly Sarah. The peace settled over me, slow and deep. I realized I hadn't just sold a house, I had sold a prison. Occasionally, months later, Mark would send rambling, pathetic emails. They were always a mixture of begging and veiled threats, focused less on reconciliation and more on retrieving some piece of forgotten documentation. I never replied. I had nothing more to say to the man who chose to be invisible to me for 7 years. The most difficult, yet necessary moment came when I established my new identity. I moved from the big coastal house, which the trust later sold to finance the down payment on a smaller, cozier property near the children's universities, and changed my name legally back to my maiden name, Sarah Jensen. It felt like shedding heavy, worn-out skin. I was free. I had not won a divorce. I had won my life back by destroying his. My revenge was not about creating pain. It was about establishing truth. It was a cold, precise equation. Every lie he lived, I liquidated. Every asset he built on deceit, I dismantled. I often think about that final evening, watching the flashing blue lights of the police car fade away down the street. I didn't feel hatred. I felt the profound calm of a surgeon who has successfully removed a malignant tumor. I walked back inside, past my quiet children, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt the solid floor beneath my feet. The silence that night was mine. They say that the greatest revenge is living well, but sometimes the greatest justice is simply forcing the truth into the light. Mark is out there somewhere, struggling, rebuilding a life from scratch, a life he should have appreciated when he had it. He knows now that the only thing holding up his magnificent facade was the woman he took for granted. I walked away with my dignity, my children, and the vast, quiet space of a future that is finally, irrevocably mine. I want to ask you, the person listening to this story, if you were in my shoes, armed with that secret knowledge and the legal tools, what would have been the first thing you sold? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the Story Vault for more true confessions.